Recently, I was browsing Twitter when I came across an article by Rhystic Studies called "The Rules Text is Irrelevant." In his text, Sam talks about the direction of Magic the Gathering and the overall impact Final Fantasies had with their new Universe Beyond set. I think it's safe to say that Magic the Gathering has finally hit mainstream appeal, and with that comes a lot of positives. At the top of the list comes new players, and with new players, our community grows and more people get involved with the game from all facets of life. However, the way these players are engaging is massively different for the first time ever in Magic's history. If you haven't read this article yet, I'll provide some context by reading the section that I think is most important towards this video. Final Fantasy has become the highest selling Magic set in the game's 32-year history before it was available to the greater public. This is unprecedented. Magic has never been collectible to anyone on the outside, never. It has certainly nurtured the collector archetype through its tenure, but always from within as a player collector. Final Fantasy is not Lord of the Rings. Its fan base is so much greater, so much more in tune with participating in a hobby structure, and so much more preconditioned to purchase collectibles. Toys, art prints, games, manga, the works. We're speaking about a magnitude of difference here. It would be nice if even a percentage of these players learn how to play Magic the Gathering, but the rules text simply does not apply at the checkout counter for this crossover. Hello?
Hi, Mark. How you doing? I was wondering where Cassa came from.
Yeah, Casarino, Italian last name.
Yeah, like Cassa I recognized, but
Yeah.
Cassa, I don't know if you know, like a Cassa is like a cash register. So I thought this was a strange username. Like I wonder why.
Oh,
you
no,
know?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm always curious. Man, I talk to a lot of folks around the world. Magic's the best because it allows me to talk with folks that live in all sorts of cool places. I have a close tie with a bunch of Italian magic, and I know a little bit about European magic just by virtue of being in the space for a while. But like I said, I think Australia is its own little micro ecosystem, and it's cool to see it kind of take off.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it's a micro ecosystem in like every sort of hobby and industry out there, because it's really hard just being so like landlocked, I guess. Time zones are bad,
no
travel's expensive. Yeah, there's a lot of barriers we have to try and make it out of Australia. So yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
I set my camera up. I'm not good to digitally meet you, dude.
You too. Unfortunately, at this point, my recording software decided to die. I still got all the audio files, so please enjoy this podcast style episode with Sam and I chatting about Universe Beyonds and everything else in between.
My name is Sam. I run the YouTube channel Rhystic Studies. I've been working on that since 2013-ish. Formally since 2015, and I make like documentary style videos for Magic.
And you did write this article on Substack, and the first thing I wanted to know is like, what were your motivations to even put this out in the world? Like a lot of people have been frustrated with Universe Beyond or maybe confused, but your article I think really summed it up perfectly for the people that may be feeling that bit of confusion or frustration. Like, was there like a moment in where you read something online where you're like, I need to write something, or did you see something in an LGS? Like, why did you write your article?
Coming to terms with UB has been 2 years in the making. I wrote a more inflammatory article last year when it was clear that Wizards was shifting toward UB as being a mainstay and not just a side gig or a bonus, like a sideshow. This is like kind of a continuation of that article in some senses. It came directly from a video I was just working on Final Fantasy, where I sort of told myself a few months ago, I was like, what if I just took this for what it is? Like, you know, what if I came at it with good faith and gave it a shot? The Final Fantasy set, I think, really proved that Wizards has good control over their side of this bargain, in the sense of like, Wizards are still world-class game designers and world builders, and you know, all the nuts and bolts of making a Magic set comes out cleanly, plus they enjoy their references, allusions, Easter eggs. So I think like the universe, having like our hands on a full UB set like this in what is now the new era, helps soften the blow of UB, but I still think there's a lot of elements that come with UB that have to be digested and addressed, and one of those is collectability. And this article was kind of the counterpart to the Final Fantasy video that I made, which was more or less complimentary and kind of me actually going the other direction. Like, what if I use the Magic set to introduce myself to a whole new subculture that has 40 years of history itself, you know? So I think the the collectability article is addressing that.
Mhm.
It's like, what are the tactics being used here? Who are buying the cards? And if I'm a fan of Final Fantasy and I know nothing about Magic, why would I buy a Magic card? And probably speaking, like from what I saw on the Reddit posts on the Final Fantasy side, because I was like living in that subreddit for 2 months while I was doing my research for this video, I just saw over and over again, like people being excited to buy the cards because they had their favorite characters on them and that was it. You know, I made a kind of a throwaway metaphor about like, you can't read the instructions from inside the medicine bottle. It feels like sometimes we're a little bit too much in the medicine bottle of our subcultures. It's probably very obvious if I told my wife that like the Final Fantasy fans are buying Magic cards because they have their favorite characters on them. That's like obvious, you know, but maybe it's not so obvious to us on the inside. So I think it's just really like that article in specifics is looking more at the collectability side of Magic and what it has to offer to a new audience. And a changing audience, an audience that'll shift every 6 months with the introduction of new franchises.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I remember in your article you mentioned specifically like Magic has only really been for like player collectors, like people inside our hobby already. So like I've never really considered like, especially when you can make the comparison of like Final Fantasy to Lord of the Rings, that like the Final Fantasy fan base is already preconditioned to be doing these things where Lord of the Rings wasn't. Whereas on paper, you can look at them and go, oh, these are very similar scale crossovers. There's the same amount of interest. But then, yeah, I just never considered that extra. Like, I never considered the Final Fantasy people. I was only ever thinking about the Magic people.
And I had no idea until I did my video how entrenched that group of folks are. Like, it is just as layered and full of rabbit holes as Magic. Like, there's so many folks on that side of the aisle that have been playing the game since they were young and follow everything and have, you know, it's like a direct like one-to-one. So when you see it in that light, then you start to understand why a set like this would appeal to them, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think my next question was like, Magic the Gathering has never really been a game in the past that's been impacted by like cultural trends in a way that's like this large, I think. Have you ever in the past seen some sort of movement like this that's had the community so on the fence or divided?
I don't think so. I think the schism is quite a bit larger than any other previous like before and after events in Magic, because Magic has been so insular. It's funny to think about Magic against Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh from the outside, from like the normies, you know, or even just other games. Like Magic has always been its own little world away from everything else. It doesn't have like a big cultural impact outside of the people who play it like Pokemon does, or even Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I think, again, I use my wife as a good comparison because she doesn't live in nerd worlds at all, but I think she could name like 5 things about Yu-Gi-Oh, and I don't even know if after living with me for 5 years she would know 5 things about Magic, you know?
Yeah.
So Magic has always felt like this. It feels a little bit like we were our own club that met in the library while everyone else was outside or playing basketball in the gym, you know?
Yeah.
And this is some of the lines I cut from that article. Maybe it'll manifest in a different article, but like now I think Magic is trying to appeal to a much larger group of folks, and it's drawing the attention of larger folks, and it's making an aggressive shift in terms of the collectability and its distribution and its like branding. And that's very strange to us who have always felt like it was a DIY grassroots project, you know? So many folks who have worked in Magic came from Magic, and even the businesses, like quote unquote businesses or people within Magic, have always felt like everyone started by just being a fan of the game.
Yep.
And now like to see that be catered to all sorts of different audiences is very shocking. In a culture that is already doing that with so many other things. Like Magic is also really late to this party. This has been going on for a decade, and I think there's just a general fatigue at the macro level of this concept, this idea that, you know, Iron Man is going to show up in Mortal Kombat. You know, we've already been doing this for so long, so I think the timing for Magic is tough. Also against what is already culturally expected from within Magic. So they're fighting many fronts. And yeah, I think like I published the Final Fantasy video today, and there's still folks that are really, really upset about UB. So it's still a very fresh wound, and like there's still a maturation process here.
What do you think people are upset about in Universe Beyond? I know for me, my biggest thing was price point and the way that impacts other formats like Limited especially. But do you think there are other concerns or other frustrations people have?
Yeah, I think even, Magic is a funny case study for the sort of like ludonarrative dissonance, the idea of ludonarrative dissonance, because there's a lot of folks who only care about Magic for what it has to offer mechanically, especially in the limited crowd or in the spiky grinder crowd, who always made the case that like, I really don't care what the card name or the illustration is showing me. I just care about what the card does.
Yep.
In its purest form, I still think like those folks, like the LSVs of the world, still really enjoy that Magic has always been packaged with its own thing and has been its own thing. And that they can say like Hypnotic Spectre means something to me, even if they don't consider themselves Vorthoses at all and they don't know what Hypnotic Spectre is. They don't care about Dominaria as like a place that is built, So I think like that is part of Magic, and seeing that shattered, or that fourth wall being broken so explicitly, is really jarring to folks who even claim to not care about world building or characters or stories or whatever. And then it's a gradient. It's like those folks on one end, and then my good Vorthos buddies who really care about Magic story and Magic characters and Magic worlds. Now they're trying to deal with like, well, we've really bought into this idea that this is a living, ongoing story that's being told, and there's like canon events, and there are canonical characters, and suddenly we have to reconcile that with like SpongeBob or again like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It just feels like a really big like shattering of a certain implicit agreement between the game designers and the players.
Yep.
And then, it just feels like inevitably it comes back to like, well, then who's making a profit on all this, It just, that's where like the motivations feel really spoiled. Like they wouldn't have done this if it didn't promise a ton of money. And it never felt like Magic was trying to make all that much money, even when it was making a ton of money.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just weird. That's there's like all of those feelings are being juggled, because I went through them last October, and I think folks are still going through them in the comments of my video and the comments of my articles, and I think it's going to be a long time that we have to deal with these, and I think everyone's answer is different. So
can you explain why Lord of the Rings and Final Fantasy might have been perceived so differently? Because I feel like I heard nothing but positive things about Lord of the Rings, and maybe that's just because of like the silo and the community that I was a part of. But Final Fantasy, I feel like there's a lot more judgment and stress around it, and I'm not sure why. Like I know Lord of the Rings thematically is a lot more in line with what Magic has been in the past, but do you think there are other factors with the release of Lord of the Rings compared to Final Fantasy?
I think about this one too a lot. Part of it is frequency of release. It felt like the Lord of the Rings set was sort of a standalone event that summer, and perhaps like as time goes on, Magic will move more towards like once a year or once every, let's say, 16 months for one of these sets, so that they start to feel special again in some way. There was excitement, I think, because of that. The Lord of the Rings is a treasured story. It's entered into like talks of popular myth. There's a lot of academic research involved with Tolkien and his work on the linguistic side, but also on the world building. It's just the par excellence of world building, and everything leads back to Lord of the Rings. Like if all games lead back to D&D, D&D goes right back to Lord of the Rings. Like that's where all of this started, just like fantasy, high fantasy storytelling at all. And it's a much more natural fit because the Magic has roots in the Lord of the Rings, Yeah. There's also an element, I think, here, which goes back to the money and the spoiling of like the saturation of what I call franchises, IPs. Like it's really hard to have these discussions without using business terms. And I think that's also what turns people off. Like it's, I hate saying the word IP or franchise as much as I hate saying the word content,
Yeah.
But like abstractly, who benefits from the Lord of the Rings, like the Lord of the Rings adaptation and universes beyond? I guess whoever owns that property, like Tales of Middle-earth or whatever they call it.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel so like, this is where it gets really tricky. It gets really gray, because the question of money is really emotional when it comes to this stuff. Like they make the argument that that Magic has been doing universes beyond forever. If you go back to Arabian Nights, that was just an interpretation of a story, the same way that this is an interpretation of something else. But like, it doesn't feel like if I put Zeus on a Magic card, like ancient Greece doesn't get a bunch of money,
Yeah.
But like if I put Spider-Man on a Magic card, like Marvel explicitly gets a bunch of money. So
Yeah.
there's less, it feels so much less like an advertisement when we're talking about stories and myth, and much more like an advertisement when we're talking about Avatar or SpongeBob, who are so directly related to some corporation or business or anything else. And that's where the yucking of the yum comes into play and I think The Lord of the Rings, for some reason, sits just outside of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of the Rings feels bigger than a Marvel quote unquote property or
Yeah.
story. It just feels like there's something more there. And I think that's why it was more acceptable, and probably on the side of Wizards, why it was smart to lead with that one, to like soften the ludonarrative dissonance, you know? There's also an element of genre at play, but I think that Magic has been actively trying to push itself outside of high fantasy for 10 years, that it's not so shocking to see, you know, steampunk Final Fantasy elements on a card now that it would have been 10 years ago when we were still living in this world of, you know, wizards and sorcery.
I think with Lord of the Rings, from my perspective as well, is like, I feel like you already mentioned, it's sort of a franchise that I feel like hasn't really been franchised in a way. Like, yeah, they tried rebooting it with Rings of Power, or whatever it was, the Amazon TV show. I feel like it hasn't been overdone. I feel like Lord of the Rings, like, they've had their moments. They tried doing The Hobbit, they tried doing these Rings of Power, but it wasn't like that much. Like, you're not buying Lord of the Rings plushies. There's no Lord of the Rings trading card game. So like, seeing it in Magic the Gathering kind of felt right from my perspective. And that's just like a big thing compared to Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is massive. It's one of the biggest games in the world. So yeah, I guess that's where that comes from. And so there are positives and negatives to that.
Yeah, it's such a good question, because the Lord of the Rings just feels like its own thing. Like, it's almost
Yeah.
uncomparable.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know. 'Cause certainly whoever owns the IP made a ton of money, or implicitly whatever. I have no idea how that business deal works, but yeah, it does feel like it's its own, I don't know, it's its own entity.
Another thing you were talking about is about bad Magic cards. And you made the comparison of Patrick Star being obviously a pretty bad Magic card, but the Secret Lair still sold out instantly, like every other Secret Lair. And I wanted to know if you think the sentiment of bad Magic cards selling poorly will continue to stick around, or if we're really heading in a direction where it's not going to matter, maybe 5 to 10 years time.
Yeah, at the end of that article, I mentioned that I talked myself into the idea of these sets being, like, I wish they were core sets in terms of their mechanical complexity, because I think that would also soften the blow as to what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
The argument still is like, well, you can't sell bad Magic cards, and I don't know why, but it occurred to me that perhaps that Patrick Star card was a litmus test. I really don't think that Wizards is dumb enough to just put Patrick Star on a really old bad Magic card just because they thought it was funny. I think there's an argument to be made that that's a data point. Like, hey, can we sell just Patrick Star on some throwaway bad card from a million years ago that no one cares about? And truthfully, I think, like, if Cloud just had First Strike and was like a 3/3 for 2, I think it would still sell a million trillion copies, because the people that are buying Cloud are not that interested in. There's, for now, still folks that really care about playing with their Magic cards. We're also reaching like mechanical complexity, like toward the upper limits of what is probably allowed and enjoyable with Magic in terms of mechanical complexity. We talk a lot about power creep, but there's like design entropy happening too, and we've really gobbled up through like years and years of design in the past, probably exponentially in the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question fully, I think, like, for sure, as more UB sets are made, I wouldn't be surprised to see one that is just kind of explicitly like throwing in the towel in terms of mechanics and saying, that's not the selling point here. I think it's wise of Wizards to also not do that. And in retrospect, I wish that the Lord of the Rings was less complex, because I think part of the, knocks against that set were its complexity and its like chunkiness and its crunchiness,
Yep.
which is not welcoming at all to new players. So for the moment, like, Magic's greatest challenge on the design side is that it's feeding 50 mouths and they all like different fruits, vegetables, and potatoes and steak. Like, everyone wants something different from Magic cards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that eventually, as the game becomes more a collectible and less a game per se, some of that complexity has to be chopped off, and And I don't know, maybe we'll see more cards like the Patrick Star come through the secret layer to start, just to see if it's possible we can sell Sonic the Hedgehog and he just has haste, you know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the Sonic the Hedgehog layer, secret layer, is already sold out. It came out like 10 hours ago or something, so that's crazy. I guess that there is a difference with them being mechanically unique, similar to like the Marvel one. And then that poses a bigger question of like mechanically unique limited time cards and how that impacts other formats as well, when I can't get a card because they all sold out instantly, but I want to play it because it's the mechanics that I like. So that's whole nother can of worms.
There's like it's like an intersection of many cans of worms at the same time with this kind of stuff. And to me, like, all I see is what's going to happen is people are going to throw away the towel on the thing that is most disposable, which is the playing with the cards. Yeah. And what's least disposable is the idea of a collectible, which is in theory supposed to be part of your collection or whatever forever. Mm-hmm. You know, people don't buy cards to collect them to sell them. They buy cards to collect them. You know, that's the promise of it. And I think that promise will override any other promise if Magic chooses to do this forever. So
yeah, I think that's the part that scares me the most. So I think this is my final question to you is, how do you think we can keep the rules text relevant as a community now?
At least for now, it really is. I think looking backwards, why do I continue to play with cards that were made 15 years ago that are, let's quote unquote, strictly worse than something I could get now? I still think that like the context of the rules text is what will determine their relevancy. Like, my whole shtick when I go on Prof Show is I build really silly decks that are very thematic and they use a bunch of cards that aren't very good. If there's a promise to be able to use cards that aren't very good, then the rules text will matter. If we keep creating sub-formats, the rules text will still matter. I think part of the community's role in all of this is to reject like the superstructures of organized play and say, well, we're just going to play good old-fashioned table, kitchen table Magic with 60 card decks, and you can have 25 copies of a card and it doesn't matter. That's where like the rules text matters the most, I think, and that the game of it will always will endure a bunch of these business decisions. That's also part of like what everyone that has a cube likes to talk about too.
Yeah.
Like, a cube is now at the point where aesthetics and theme are starting to matter more than mechanics. And if that's the case, then suddenly cards, like the rules text of certain cards will matter more than an explicitly good version of that card, And some cards will be completely discredited. Like, even if this Sonic is a mechanically unique card that has a very special and particular ability, because of availability or because it's Sonic the Hedgehog, some folks will reject it in favor of a card that does something slightly worse because it's there and it fits thematically with what they're trying to do, Mm-hmm. So I think the rules text will always matter to the folks who really just play the game for the game. And Commander is like the form of that right now. In time, who knows what happens with Commander? Maybe Commander endures, but I think it'll always come down to just like casual people playing for fun, Mm-hmm. That's where like the cards will be their purest and always be there as a promise of the game side and not the collectible side.
Yep, I completely agree.
Hopefully I made sense, dude. The problem is I can't give you one one sentence answers to any of this. It's so hard for me.
Perfect. No, I really wanted to pick your brain on it because like a lot of people have been feeling the same, but I feel like a lot of people always approach their issues with Magic or with Universe Beyond with a very emotional response. And I think there are a lot of other things at play that people choose to ignore or maybe just don't consider. So yeah, it was really interesting to pick your brain as someone who's been in the space for so long, as as a creator, as a player, as someone who just enjoys playing the game. So yeah, that's really cool.
I think that's a good point, and I'd love to see more folks kind of approach it from like, just put your business guy hat on and see how you assess this situation, or your game design hat and assess, Mm-hmm. You're right that it's so tender. That's why everyone is so emotionally charged about it.
Yeah.
But after that, like you go through the motions of that, then you can start to look at it from different angles. And I think that's when we'll get more and more rich responses to what this actually means and implies,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Sam for jumping on a call with me to just chat about his article and just the overall perception he has on Universe Beyonds. I'll link everything in the description, including the video references, the articles, and anything else that you've seen in the last 30 minutes. Thank you so much for making it this far, and if you did, please consider subscribing, sharing this with a friend, and tell me what you think of Universe Beyonds and specifically Final Fantasy. We're getting closer and closer to this YouTube channel being partnered, which is a massive dream of mine, so all your support means so much. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.